welcome back. I'm here with James McCrae coming to us live from Austin. Hi, James. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course, Beth. Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to chat with you today.
I'm excited to get into it. So, I was recently in Austin and I happened to be invited to one of your book launch events and went and was like, oh, I follow this guy on the internet. I really like what he's talking about. This is an area, creativity, art, being an influencer on the internet. These subjects have been very alive, and especially creativity for me the past few years. I was just telling James off camera how I find myself assigning play and creativity to my clients, even though I am actually just a business coach. So we're going to get into it a little bit more, and I want to dive deep into this deeper world of what is underneath all the work that you're putting out there. But so James is an author, a meme poet, and teacher who empowers creators to live with purpose and turn imagination into reality. He's the founder of Sunflower Club, a global community dedicated to creativity as a tool for personal healing and social transformation. As a creative strategist, he has worked with top brands and startups to define and actualize their message and mission. His books include Shit Your Ego Says Without the I, How to Laugh in Ironic Amusement During Your Existential Crisis. I love that title. And then his new book, The Art of You. And it's funny, James. Speaking of existential crisis, I was just talking to someone a couple days ago. I'm like, yeah, I wake up in the middle of the nights with these like existential thoughts that are like doomsday. And I'm sure I'm not the only one right now in the state of the world who has these doomsday feelings. And it's funny because I actually just find myself laughing at it all, like kind of just being engaged in the cosmic joke. So I love the title of that book. But before we get into the content and discussing your new book, I would love to hear your story. You and I were talking. You did the New York City career life. I'm sure I could guess what that was all about. But I would love to hear, when you were a kid, were you on this path to becoming a meme poet? Was there even such a thing back then? What was your upbringing, your path to get you here?
Yeah, I definitely was an artist as early as I can remember. That's kind of what I've always identified with. And I'm from a very small town in rural Minnesota. So, sort of the middle of nowhere. Like growing up, I was living in a town with like a few hundred people, and then later in a town with a few thousand people. So, there's pros and cons to every place you can grow up, right? Because what I lacked in the vibrancy of the culture and the city life that one might have in a place like New York City or Los Angeles, I had a lot of freedom just to explore and to roam around and to let my imagination wander. And there wasn't a lot of pressure to get into the right elementary school so you can get into the right high school so you can get into the right college. It was a lot more of a just kind of a free sort of upbringing. So I think most kids are creative. I think creativity is our nature. I think every child is an artist because they're curious and they want to explore, and it doesn't matter how talented they are, or they're not trying to achieve anything. They're just trying to let their innate creativity flow through them. So, I was no exception to that. And I guess the only difference is I never let it go. And I really was, I think poetry was the first really connection to the path that I'm on now. And I discovered poetry when I was like 14, and I started writing poetry. So by the time I graduated high school, I had already written like hundreds and hundreds of poems because I just was doing that like almost every day. And which is of course is important to be a writer, because any writing or any practice or anything at all that you want to be good at, just practice and repetition is the most important part. So I got so much of my, quote unquote bad writing or immature writing, or just I went through so many phases and styles that I refined my work so much just by doing it again and again and again. And I really didn't want to go to college. Like my friends were going to college, and it was time to start like planning your career, and nothing really interested me. I kind of just kept wanting to be a writer. I was also painting at this time, and I went to college because I felt like I had to, and I hated it, and I dropped out after a semester, and I just traveled around the country doing my art for a couple of years. And I'm very glad I did that because it gave me some freedom to explore my creativity. But at the same time, that during that period, I got really depressed because I didn't have any direction. My friends were in college. I was kind of a lone wolf and a starving artist, and didn't have any purpose and or guides or mentors for my work. So I decided I needed to have more direction, more purpose. So I went back to college, but I went to a art and design college. So I learned how to apply my creativity towards something that was had a social utility. In my case, graphic design. And after design school, I actually started working in the advertising industry. So I like to say I got into the business world. I snuck into the business world through the back door as an artist. And I was a graphic designer for a few years in Minneapolis. And then I got kind of bored with that and wanted to explore other aspects of that um, industry. So I switched over to being a brand strategist. And this is when I moved to New York, and I worked on Madison Avenue as a brand strategist for a decade, um, coming up with brand strategies and marketing campaigns and naming and taglines and all of the creative aspects that go into branding. And that was, again, more practice because it was just repetition, client after client, project after project. And did that for a number of years. And I started writing books while I was still working in advertising.
And then it just started taking off. Like, whoosh. I mean, posting online, putting the
Yeah,
books out there.
yeah. They say that it takes years to become an overnight success. So it did start taking off, but really, it's a slow burn. I think that most people that are successful, there's a whole journey that's behind the scenes that you can't see. You only see the tip of the iceberg coming out of the water, but there's a whole bunch of work and effort and trial and error and wrong turns and misdirections under the surface that people can't see. So yeah, I put out my first book. I got really lucky and just stumbled into a publishing deal for it, but I didn't have a name or an audience, so it didn't do super well. It wasn't until I started making memes and exploring the internet meme as a creative medium unto itself, and then seeing those go super viral around the internet, that my at least my Instagram started to become more and more well known. And then that led to my second book, which was actually that's the one, How to Laugh and Ironic Amusement During Your Existential Crisis. That was a book that really was born from the pandemic, and it's a collection of poetry and memes. um so that was during that time, is yeah, just learning to do memes and really tapping back into poetry, and just deepening my own path as an artist, kind of really put me in the direction of where I'm going now.
So good. And you know what? You were saying something about all this behind the scenes, and I'm sitting here shaking my head. Something I talk about a lot. In today's world of influencers on the internet, and maybe both of us might be considered some of them, me much smaller, but people out there see Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is, YouTube, and they think like, oh, all I have to do is just post, and then, I'm going to have 500,000 followers and make my money by getting product placements and just be a professional influencer. And they want it like tomorrow. Or for me, once in a blue moon, I'll get someone saying, like, I started my business last week. I want to make 100,000 in the next 2 months. And I'm usually like, I love your enthusiasm, and um, it's not an overnight success. But I think this world that we're in of everything just seeming so easy and instantaneous and like attainable, I think because social media is only showing a certain amount. I'm curious, like, have you had interactions with people who are like, how did you do this? And I want this. And I started my meme account 2 weeks ago. And why am I not famous yet? Like, what is your view on this? Because I found it to be getting worse over the years, where people just want this, like, it's like the Amazon Prime effect.
Yes, totally. It's interesting. Social media is such a new and powerful platform, and for me, it all happened organically. I never intended to become an influencer, or even I never really had a plan to monetize my platform. For me, it was about really the biggest shift for me was when I really started to look at Instagram as a creative medium unto itself. Like I, I'm a student of art history, and I look at the history of literature, art, poetry, music, whatever it is, and it's always changing. Like poetry used to be people like in the days of Homer, they'd be reciting memorized myths that rhymed. And it was almost a way of preserving a culture's mythology and history. And then once, you know, the printing press came along, then people were writing things in a different way that could be read and consumed and spread. And then when there's the rise of audio recording and radio, people would do spoken word poetry, and then that would turn into rap. And so it's like it always changes, and now poetry is something that can live in a meme form on social media. So the biggest switch for me is, like, honestly, I was pitching a book with my agent, and it wasn't picked up by publishers, and I felt really frustrated by that because I had spent so much time working on it. And I realized, like, oh, I how many hours did I put into writing this book? Like, many hours went into writing this book, and then no one ever saw it. Like, I didn't, because it's like, if unless it's published, it just sits there on your computer, and it's like, you're not sharing it, no one's seeing it. And I realized, well, what if I put that same creative effort into social media content, but like not just like frivolous content for the sake of content, but really like applying my creativity and my perspective as an artist, and to really like make content that was art, that memes and poetry and all these things. And that's when my account started to grow. So it was more for me, it was about dedicating myself to a creative practice and to get my voice and my message out there. And I had no ambitions to be an influencer. In fact, I realized that, oh, I'm going to have to start doing videos and reels, and that was really uncomfortable for me at first because I'm a writer. I'm really comfortable to hide behind my words and put my words out there. But when it comes to putting me out there, I was very uncomfortable. So I really had to force myself to do it. So I wasn't seeking the spotlight. It was more like, oh no, like I have to like just show up and put myself out there. So for me, it was like the opposite. I wasn't trying to, and that's the best. And then I kind of gradually learned how to monetize it, and I learned, okay, so I know how to make memes. I have I'm I have a proven track record of doing that, so I'm going to teach a class on how to make memes. And then I just naturally, like, I was already an expert in it. So I launched a class to teach how to do it. And that kind of put me in a position of being a teacher and being someone that, could engage with my followers in a deeper way where they could sign up for my classes. And that, and then that's just like gradually becomes a business. But for me, it definitely started out with just trying to be an artist and trying to use the medium as a creative outlet. And just focus. I like to say, like, it's better to focus on on your message rather than your metrics, and your metrics will grow in proportion to the clarity of your message.
This is so big, and I just want to point out to the listeners, because this is something I see all the time in my clients. Not all my clients, but a lot of clients where they have something in them. It's like eating away at their soul. And that's when a lot of people come to me, where it's like, okay, I either need to do this or I'm just not going to be able to live with myself.
Yeah.
And then there's that block. And I literally hear this all the time, like, I'm blocked, I'm stuck, I'm afraid. What if? What if? And it's like, you know what? And I just want to point out, very much like my own story, your story was where it was, you were just following this kind of innate drive to create for yourself without having to get somewhere, without having a goal in mind. And then it just kind of happened naturally on its own. It emerged. And that's what my own story was like too. It's like, I didn't even know there was such a thing as a business coach. I just fell into this and was like, oh, is this a business? Cool. I love it. And like, I didn't even know. I was just doing it. And I'm like, oh, you can charge people for this? Cool. But it's amazing. And I feel like it's gotten worse over the last few years, where I'm meeting more and more people that are just afraid to even put it out there for themselves. And that's why I wanted to bring you in, because I was like, wow, this process of like you said, like the creative process versus like tying it to metrics of, fans, likes, money, income, where's this going? It's like to do it just for yourself, and do it for that place of like, well, what's coming through you. And I'm sure you get a lot of people coming to your work or your books, who feel that fear or that stuckness or the what if. Like, I have a book living in me, but what if no one reads it? Or I have all this art, but what if no one likes it? Or what if I never make money from it? I hear these a lot, and I hear them with, by the way, I hear them with people who are like businesses that are very like proven, and there's tons of people that are already successful. Like, I want to be whatever it is, like a health coach. I'm like, well, this
Yeah.
person's doing it, why not you? But yeah, what do you say to people who are stuck in that like utter fear to the point where they just are paralyzed, like I think a lot of our society?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is that, it's been said that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So, like, just, you've got to start somewhere. And one kind of North Star that I've always kept is, the next 5 years are going to pass a lot quicker than we think they are. And if we do nothing, like, in terms of making progress towards our dreams, we're going to blink our eyes and 5 years are going to be gone and we're not going to be any closer to them. But if you just orient your ship in a slightly different direction and just start taking one step at a time, in the next 5 years, that new orientation in your direction is going to lead you to a significantly different place. So, like, don't get ahead of yourself. Don't start worrying about the end result and the end goals. Just put one foot in front of the other in the direction of your dreams, where you want to be, and you're going to get closer and closer and closer. And it's all about just dedicating yourself to that journey and to that path. And you only get better by doing. Like, I'm a big believer in, you learn by doing. You're not going to be like learn how to write a book by thinking about it.
Yeah, I
You
know.
need
I'm
to
like,
do it. Like, it's as simple as that. Like, um I have friends that do stand-up comedy, and they say there's the only way you can get better at stand-up comedy is by going on stage and bombing. And no one is good at first. There's not one comedian who went up there and their first shot and was like already fully formed. And you can sit in your house and write jokes all day, every day, and it's still not going to get you better to being a stand-up comedian, because you need to, it's about being comfortable on stage. It's about being comfortable failing. And once you've bombed enough, then you're comfortable being bad, then you'll be ready to be good. Not only that, but I think that there's different rules when it comes to social media. And it's not about being perfect. It's just not. Like, I think that there's this expectation that we have in our minds that, like, oh, I've got to be perfect. I've got to, like, it's not the Olympics. Like, you're not a gymnast in the Olympics who's trying to get a perfect landing and get that perfect 10. It's counterintuitive, but it's that vulnerability and being a little bit messy and being a little bit raw and vulnerable. That's inviting. You know, vulnerability creates intimacy because you're being real, you're being true to who you are. So I feel like you can tell, like, being fake or trying too hard or trying to attain some idea of perfection, it actually it that actually hurts more than it helps, because I think that there's ironically, like, the true perfection requires some imperfection and being natural. And you know that way that's the only way you can find, like, the real people. Like, if you want to be in a relationship with someone, you've got to bring your authentic self to the table, period. Like, your friends are the people that you can be yourself with. So if you want followers, it's similar principle where they want you to be yourself. They don't want you to be perfect, perfect, perfect. They want you to be natural, authentic, and you, because our quirks are actually what makes us lovable. We think of our quirks as maybe being character flaws or this or that, but no, our quirks are what make us lovable. So just showing up as your weird, authentic self in the age of social media, that's actually what works better. So don't worry too much about it. Don't overthink it. Again, one foot in front of the other. Take risks, be vulnerable, and see where it takes you.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I'm saying this all the time to my clients. In the end, I help people grow their businesses, but in the end, it's really like just coming into your authentic self and radiating it out there. But I think with this world of cancel culture, and by the way, especially in the psychedelic space, everybody has an opinion about everything. It's like it's such a nuanced area of like, this is right and that's wrong, and so if you say this, then you're bad, and you just get put on this list. And you have to, this is actually why my programs are called like True Path, Your True Path, You Are the Medicine, True Path Entrepreneur. It's like you can only worry about this path, but the reality is, and I don't know about you, but I have noticed, like, the more you're out there in the world, the more you're sharing your voice, the more there's opinions. There's, I get, mine's like every few months I get a hater. I have come to actually find it entertaining. I usually take the hate content and turn it into content, and then it becomes even better content. Do you do
I've
that?
done that. I've done that for sure.
But it's interesting how many people are like living in fear of like, I'm afraid of saying the one thing, and because everybody's going to write me off or cancel me, or even me. It's like I talk about money once in a while because it's a reality of the world we live in, and people get really up in arms if money's even mentioned. I'm like, but don't we have money around us? Like, isn't it just part of our world? So how do you deal? Yeah, like, I'm curious. Like, many years ago, were you getting some hate and it like stung you, and now you get it and you just kind of like roll your eyes and laugh it off, or do you not get haters at all?
Yeah. You know, honestly, these days, I really, really don't. And I can talk about that because I used to, and I used to be afraid of it. I remember when I first, like very first started to put myself out there and put my, it's one thing to share your life on social media and like your photos and whatever. Um, but when I started to post my ideas in a different way, I remember being nervous because I'm like, well, what if people don't agree with this, or what if I'm wrong? Like, who am I to be so smart to even know that this is the right thing to say? And I was like, didn't trust myself enough to really do it. But I was just like inch by inch, I started to get comfortable doing it, and I learned a lot about this during my meme phase. And by which, I still make some memes, but I really had like a meme period from like 2020 and like 2022. And it's like really during the pandemic, because I realized that there was so much going on during the pandemic, and I was into all of these like esoteric YouTube rabbit holes. Some of them were psychedelic related. Like I got really into Terrence McKenna and watching Terrence McKenna YouTube videos, and then there, of course, there was all these different controversial opinions around the pandemic itself and the politics at that time, and there was a lot of things that were very sensitive. And I found memes to be a place where you could explore some of those ideas. So, this is what I learned was it's so careful. You've got to be so careful with how you word things. Like I realized that you know, you could phrase things in a way that opens yourself to be misunderstood. Or, if there's a controversial subject that you are broaching, it's fine to do that. It's great to do that. And honestly, people want that because people are so, even the people who are viewing your content, they're sick of seeing people playing it safe. They want something real. They want something that's a little bit edgy. It's like it's okay to have an opinion, right? And people more and more are craving those real, authentic opinions and perspectives. Um, but at the same time, if you go into that conversation with a combative tone, in
Mhm.
other words, like, oh, I'm saying that I'm taking this stance and it's kind of pushing up against like this other stance. So you're kind of going into it with that combative mindset and you're setting yourself up to get attacked. So what I've learned is like just by wording things, or how can I approach this in a way that everyone can kind of like understand it. So it really forced me to question how I communicate and the words that I use. So it's like, because social media can be so divisive. It's like I compare it to like, okay, let's say you're at a dinner table and everyone is bickering. It's like Thanksgiving dinner and the whole family is bickering. That's kind of what social media can feel like sometimes, and like you can't say anything without someone pushing back against it. So for me, I was like, how can I find that tone that transcends the bickering, where we can like elevate the tone of the conversation? And so for me, that meant just being very careful with my words and trying to be as inclusive as possible. And there's no, all opinions are valid, so it's not like me having opinion negates the possibility of a contrary opinion. You know what I mean? So it's like really having compassion with how you show up. So even if you say something that is polarizing, can you say it in such a way that opens the door for understanding and nuance and subtlety, instead of trying to get into a too much of a heated online debate, which I'm not a fan of. And then so now I'm just trying to show up and try to make my content really inclusive. And I don't want to push any buttons. I think there's enough people pushing buttons. So now I'm just chilling, and I don't get a ton of the haters, but I used to get at least a few negative comments for everything I posted. And even if I would get 100 positive comments and then like two negative comments, of course I'd always fixate on those negative comments. But and I think there's two kinds of negative feedback, right? There's criticism that can be constructive. So in other words, like, did I say this in a way that maybe wasn't fully like I was open myself to be misunderstood, or they're introducing another perspective that is actually going to end up broadening my horizons and help make my opinion even stronger. And that's a negative feedback that you can learn from and grow from. And then there's some that's just, it's just mean spirited and hateful, and that I have no tolerance for, and I just delete that.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing this, because I actually was just talking to someone about this the other day. How I come from a Buddhist background as a big part of my background, and I always watch what I'm saying from this place of like, is this coming from a place of compassion for and like neutrality? Because
Yeah.
I also do believe, like you said, there is a way to voice your truth, give your opinion, but without creating more divisiveness. Because that's something else that I've committed to since what, 3 or 4 years ago now, 4 years ago, where I'm like, oh my God, there's just so much divisive content. And of course, I think the algorithms like a lot of this, right? Because they get a lot of clicks. It gets a lot of, it's how it works. Everyone forgets these social media companies are a business that are trying to make money, and they want clicks. They need views. So the divisive content seems to rile things up, but I don't want to play in it because it's not what I stand for in my own value system. But I can still talk about, the tough topics from this place of like, just sharing my opinion, my voice. And you're right, like you said, the words and like your Instagram handle, words are vibrations. And this is something someone taught me so many years ago, to watch like the vibration of even like the littlest, like one word you could choose over a different word. Like the tiniest thing. Even someone I work with on my team, I said I'm launching what I think I called it my cheaper program, and she's like, how can you say that better? I'm like, oh, you're right. Like even calling it cheap versus more accessible.
Yes.
Just these tiny little nuances. So thank you so much for sharing. And this is where I encourage people to really be your creative self, get your voice out there, don't be afraid, but then also like come from like establishing your value system. For some people where their creativity maybe is divisive content, like, hey, all of the power to you if that's what you want to be putting out there in the world. But like you are, I'm like, I don't have energy for that. If someone's downright mean, like that's another story. But I've actually had conversations with people through my email, because I do email marketing, and that's where I've gotten most of the content, where it's like someone just writes back and gives their opinion. And I've actually had healing, like adult conversations where the other person actually came around and apologized. It's happened to me multiple times. And I'm like, wow, here we are, two adults communicating, and maybe this will make the world a better place, in like with one little seed planted. So I'm glad you talked about that. Now, I want to ask you about something that's come up so much, just at least in my industry, but everywhere. But, I'm a business coach. I help people grow their businesses. And there's a lot of people out there all of a sudden, just in the last 6 months alone, who are just touting like, oh, use AI to create content and make art and, grow your business and write all your content and publish a book. I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, it's kind of getting a little out of control so quickly. How many people are pushing this as like the shortcut to creation? And I keep saying, I'm actually doubling down on the opposite. Like, oh, actually, how can I just be more human and more myself and more real and more like natural? But what are your views on the direction of AI and like what's going to happen around, creativity in general?
Hmm.
And then also like the social media world, and then even publish, like I have this fear of like, I want to publish my book, but I'm just like, I don't even have it in me yet. But then I'm like, well, should I write it now before AI just puts books out of business? like
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's going to be good and bad. It already is good and bad. I also think it's inevitable. I said earlier, social media, before social media, we had the printing press. And before the printing press, we had scrolls. Before that, we had, memorization. So things do advance and things change. And back in the day when people would memorize these epic poems, I'm sure there's some people that thought that when you write something on a scroll, you lose some of the ability to memorize and that power of that person to person, recitation, you know, but the world moves on and then things change. So I think that we're moving into an age where AI is going to radically transform our society on the most fundamental levels. And we're only seeing the very beginning of this. And it's already having huge ripple effects. So I think there's going to be a lot of obviously jobs that AI replaces. And even like you said, if someone is saying, oh, yeah, write your copy with AI, well, what they're also saying is don't hire a copywriter. you know, so these are it's a shortcut, like you said, yes, and it's um and it does create economic and employment issues, absolutely. Now, in terms of AI being used for creativity, I mean, there's things AI is good at and things it's not good at, and I don't know what it's going to be good at and what it's not going to be good at, because it's not good at writing books now. It can do some cute things. Um, Actually, I think I actually do believe that there are there's I think AI is more has infiltrated the entertainment industry, in particular TV and movies, more than we think. I think a lot of scripts, there's AI involvement, and even with some of the visualizations. Um, so there is already a because I mean, think about like what we have our hands on as consumers, as regular people, with AI today. Um, but the heads of movie studios and all of they have access to, and like, to say nothing about the government, they always have much more advanced versions of this technology. So it's out there. It's already very prevalent, and I've seen a lot of interesting use cases for it as well. Like, for example, um, in both fashion and architecture, it's a really interesting way to do what I would call rapid prototyping. So it's like, let's brainstorm some new directions and some innovative architecture or some fashion design, and then using AI as a tool to generate these prototypes. So it's not like it's really about that human AI collaboration. So I see it as more of a tool that humans use rather than a replacement for humans, at least in the case of creativity and art. I think humans can direct AI in very positive directions, and it is going to remove some of the more monotonous, repetitive work. Now, what happens when thousands and thousands and millions of people who relied on that repetitive work for their livelihood, and that is no longer viable because AI is doing it better and cheaper and faster? Um, that's the question that's going to be very interesting, and it's going to be very challenging for society. But in the long run, I do think that it will afford people more time for creativity, and even it will be in the same way that I use a computer and I use social media to make my art and to share my art, and I have that relationship with that computer. It's going to be similar with AI, where we can use AI and not be used by AI to make compelling art, and I think it's going to be you know pretty close to magic. I mean, it already is when you see some of the use cases of AI. It's like this is would be unfathomable a decade ago. Um, so in a way, it is magic, and it's very mysterious and scary as well. But I think human creativity always will thrive. I think the thing with AI, it's based on existing data. Like it is pulling from existing data. The human intuition pulls from, a place beyond the world of 3D, beyond the matrix, so to speak. Um, so our intuition still has access to, I would say, divine and mystical insight that AI is not capable of connecting with. So I think humans still win, but AI is going to be a close collaborator in a lot of ways in the future.
Okay, I like this theory. And it's funny because if what was it, a couple years ago, I had this discussion with someone about, well, if God is everything, if everything is divine, well, AI is part of that. Maybe it is. It's
Yeah.
here. It's part of this consciousness. I don't know. It's a hard one for me to accept, but I also like you actually just said, I had this vision. This sounds so generic, but it's real for me. During an ayahuasca ceremony, probably in 2014 or 15. It was a while ago, and it showed me, actually it might have even been 2013 because it was a long time ago, and I remember it showed me this vision of humanity just kind of like sitting back and making art and playing music and celebrating, like kind of like what we do at a festival, right? Just celebrating life, enjoying life, getting creative, praising the earth, doing, beautiful rituals, praying by the fire, while these robots were just doing the mundane work to keep us like essentially alive, help grow food, maybe bring us whatever goods and services we need, water, like build homes, who knows. And when I saw this vision back then, this is before AI was like out like it is today, I actually thought this was a really great thing. All I could
Mhm.
think was like, whoa, this is so exciting. I hope this happens in our lifetime because I would love the world to just be a place where maybe we don't work. Yeah, I don't know about you. I don't work 40 hours a week, but the typical American, whatever we used to work in New York City, I'm sure you and I both had because I worked a corporate career in a very kind of slave driving industry where it was very normal in New York City to work 9 to 8 or 9 to 9 or 9 to 7 was like a normal day. So I was like, oh, maybe it'd be okay if we actually didn't have to work like that. And we did actually have time to work the land and make art and, just make beautiful sculptures for absolutely no reason.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's weird that they call it artificial intelligence, and I mean, maybe it's just intelligence. And this is more kind of a VR thing, but I remember this one. There's a story that Terrence McKenna told. He had a vision on ayahuasca as well, and and I think he was on a very, what he would call a heroic dose, and
Always.
he had a vision of the distant future, and there was a tribe of people living in the rainforest, and they were completely naked, and um, there was no impact of industry around them. It was all natural. And so they lived in communion with nature. But when these people closed their eyes, they had access to what would essentially be a virtual world. And this is where they could, you could call it like the metaverse, where like you could interact with people, you could see things from far away. um you could do business, you could do all of these things that was available in what was essentially a virtual world. And this is just like a vision he had, but it was like that ultimate integration of extreme connection to nature, but then also like the cleanest, like highest technologies. And what Terrence McKenna theorized is that if we were to move in a more digital direction, and like let's say this is some kind of advanced VR of some sort, that actually does potentially put less strain on the environment. If we're not building all of these things and all of these parking lots, if we could handle more of the industry in this virtual world, it actually could help to save the earth. I'm not saying I'm pro this idea or anti this idea, but it was a vision that Terrence McKenna had, and I at least find it interesting to think about.
Yeah, Terrence McKenna too. Amazing. And only time will tell, and we shall see. And I don't think there's, I try to not get caught up in the, waking up in the middle of the night with these existential laugh slash freakouts of like, what the fuck is going on in the world? But to really just try to be present to it all and enjoy it, and you know be in the connection, be in community, and creativity. And this is something else I wanted to talk to you about. When I went to your book talk and listened to little excerpts of the book, it really spoke to a lot of what I hear about. um yes, I get people coming to me for their business, and I get this kind of this other client that's out there, and it tends to be this kind of archetype of someone in their midlife who's done very well, who's maybe like, you and I had this corporate career in New York City and had all the things and did very well. And then it kind of got to this point of, okay, my soul, like something's eating at me. I'm not fulfilled. And I do hear this from a lot of people. That's usually when they are thinking like, wow, maybe I should turn to psychedelics because I hear about this on the news or in the media, and maybe this is the answer. Which, maybe it's one of the answers, but I think on a deeper level, it's something else. And I do think that connection to creativity, presence, the earth, like to that kind of soul emergence of what's coming through, which on every level, it is actually creativity. Doesn't matter if it's going and creating a new business or making art or meme poetry. Um, and here in the Western world, at least, I feel like it's just such a big missing piece. And I know just even from my own life, just a few years ago, I picked up the paints again for the first time. And I realized, like, wow, I have not picked up paints since college, I think, unless you count like working on a Burning Man project. And it's kind of I was like, wow, what happened? There's this period of like 15, 20 years of just like dropping creativity, and then now it's like my creativity always has a purpose, which is another thing. And it's kind of like, okay, without the metrics. Is this, I'm curious, is this what your Sunflower Club is all about? And like, I know you do creative coaching, and like, are you finding this is a common like missing piece in a lot of people's journeys right now? Because it seems to be like,
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And yeah, that is the premise of Sunflower Club. Sunflower Club is it's an open mic creativity gathering that I host here in Austin, but it's also an open template for anyone to use and to host one in their own community. And the basic premise is I really do think that when it comes to creativity, we've sort of been lied to. And but what I mean is, you look at the wealth imbalance in the world today. There's most of the world's wealth is in the hands of very few people, and the vast majority of people don't have access to any wealth. And there's something similar that has happened with creativity, because I do believe that creativity is our nature. I do think we are designed to create. We are all animated by the life force of source creation. And it's an energy that moves through us that wants to be expressed in any way. You don't have to be a painter or a poet. You can express yourself in so many ways. But what we have in today's society is that we've got to, unless you're like a published author or a professional artist, like we have this idea of creativity and art being reserved for this privileged class of hyper talented creators. And that's great that some people are super talented, and if you are super talented, you deserve to be paid for your work. But creativity is not a competition. It's not a hierarchy where it's all of it is, all of the creative juices are hoarded at the top of the pyramid. Creativity should be available for everyone. So with Sunflower Club, what I've come to realize is that creativity is actually a healing modality, because what it does is it connects us with our inner child and that inner artist. And when we go throughout our day, we experience all kinds of things. Life happens, trauma happens, negative emotions happen, and they go into our body. And if we don't make an effort to purge them, to get them out of our system, they're going to linger and they're going to get stuck, and it's going to create imbalance. It's going to create physical sickness. It's going to create emotional sickness, spiritual sickness. So what I love about one thing I love about the world today is there are so many wellness tools available, and people, can go into a sauna or a sweat lodge and they can sweat out the toxins that are in their body. They can go to Peru and drink ayahuasca and purge in that way. But I think when you sit down, for me, it's when I sit down to write, what I'm doing is I'm looking within myself. I'm feeling my feelings and I'm sensing my energy, and I'm trying to sense, what's trying to come out of me. And when those words come into my consciousness and are released onto the paper, that's a form of purge, where you're letting out your stuck energy and your stuck emotions in the form of an expression. So there's a purge just in getting it out on a notebook. But then with Sunflower Club, it's about expressing it in public, because it's even more cathartic when you can release that and have it be received by a supportive community. So it's not about being the most talented. If your talent is a bonus, if you're talented, great. You get an extra pat on the back, but it's really for everyone. And it's just about that expression rather than suppression. So I think it's something that everyone could benefit from. And that's also the premise of The Art of You, my new book, which is about reclaiming your creativity and giving anyone the tools to tap into that inner artist and refine their creative process, regardless of what form their art takes. Because I think that business can be art. You could host dinner parties in a way that is art. You could treat your social media content as art. So it's less about the specific medium you're using and more about, letting that creative spirit and that energy flow through you, to lead a more fulfilling life.
Oh, I love this. I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what happens. And that's why people are like, I really believe people are starting to wake up and feel this. It's like as a collective that there's been so much of this just kind of in our, millennia of the world that has been operating how it has been. Then you throw in industrial revolution, capitalism, and then, I really think America, maybe Europe and the Western world, it's just even worse, and then as someone who lived in this massive city where it was like, I don't know if you had the same perception, but living in New York City, it was all about work. It was like
Yeah.
just kind of part of the culture. It's like you get the badge of honor if you work hard and work long. And then the rest was just like getting wasted. So it was like work, get wasted, work, get wasted. Then it was like work, get wasted, spend money. So it was like getting wrapped up in that cycle. And then so many people hit this point of like, oh, I have 3 homes and I've traveled all over the world. And why am I still miserable? So purging this creative impulse out there without caring about talent. And even when you were saying that, I'm like, well, what is talent anyways, right? Like who's to say who's talented and not? I mean, yeah, maybe there's a certain level of validation out there in the world or with the internet or money or whoever buys whatever art, but in the end, who's to say what's talent, right?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. First of all, yes, art is a matter of subjective taste, right? Because if you look at music, like, look, there is some beautifully orchestrated classical music out there that people really love, and there is some gritty punk rock, sloppy, raw expression in music that people also love. They're very different. So there's no right or wrong style. You know, I'm a big believer in just finding the style that comes most naturally to you. So I think, part of being an artist is learning about yourself. Because it's like, what kind of art do I make? What is my style? What is my unique creative signature? This requires a deep knowledge of self. It requires a lot of self-examination to know who you are, so you can reflect that style into your art. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, punk rock music, not perfect. Look at even the paintings of Jackson Pollock, where he would just fling paint onto the canvas in this violent, messy way. But he did it in such a way that he really perfected his style. So it was nothing like what anyone else was doing, but he perfected his own style. So it's really about how we show up in the world. How do we interface with the world? And then you only get better by doing as well. So it's like there's the yes. So like you don't have to be talented, and creativity has its own benefit and its own reward, independent of the results it gets. It is cathartic, it is healing, and it is fulfilling. But if you want to be good at it and you want to grow an audience and you want to become a pro at it, that is within reach as well, as long as you're dedicated. Malcolm Gladwell, the author, he famously said that to master anything, it requires 10,000 hours of practice put into it. So again, you don't get anywhere unless you start doing it and practicing it. So if that is what you want to do and that is your desire, um, there's nothing to stop you other than just learning your own approach that is unique from other approaches. One of my favorite artists of any sort is the jazz musician Miles Davis, and he said, "Sometimes it takes a long time to sound like yourself."
That's a
So you
great
almost need to
quote.
like try on different voices, different styles. It's almost like if you're a teenager trying to find your fashion sense, right? It's like you're kind of awkward. You're going to get that weird haircut. You're gonna think something looks cool, so you're gonna try it, but it doesn't work for you, right? And then as you get older, you start to learn what comes naturally to you. So that's what creativity is. It's really learning the style that comes naturally to you and singing the song that only you can sing.
Uh, it's been so inspiring. I can't wait to get creative in my garden in a month or so.
Absolutely.
And so many other things. But James, let's hear about so you have Sunflower Club, you have your new book that's come out. What else is coming up for you this year? Writing another book, launching something new. Please share with us what's happening.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be more books. No, I have no news on that at the moment. I'm going to be teaching some online classes on this topic. Nothing that's set in stone yet, but I'm going to have some online classes around connecting with that inner artist and finding your own authentic expression. And there's going to be some in-person stuff as well. There's going to be some retreats that are coming up later this year. And then where I'm most active is my Instagram. You can follow me at Words Are Vibrations. And then the link in my bio shows where you can buy my books. You can check out my classes, and yeah, listen to my podcast, all that good stuff.
Awesome. Well, we'll have all the links right here in the show notes. I love the idea of creativity retreats, by the way.
Yeah.
There was one last week that I almost went on in Costa Rica, and my timing wasn't working out with other travels, but I had a former client who was putting on a creativity retreat, and I was like, yeah, wait, this is what our world needs right now. Just if you have to lock yourself away for a week to go be creative, and that's what it takes. Because all in man, I'm one of those people where it's like, I have to go to the middle of nowhere in Peru to finally go paint,
Yeah.
which, one of these days I'll actually pick up a paintbrush just on a random like weekend or something. But I am a fan of this. James, thank you so much for being here. This was such an honor to get to know you and your work and have this amazing discussion that I think is so near and dear to so many people's hearts. And Thank you for sharing your high vibration words out there in the world.
The pleasure is all mine. Nice chatting with you, and thanks for having me on.